Hi, Lee here. It's been a while since my last guitar build. I thought it was about time I started a new one. So what I'm going to do this time is another Telecaster build. But there's a couple of things I've not attempted building my own guitar yet, and they're the things I want to try for this one. So first of all, I'm going to build my own fretboard. So as you know previously from my other guitar builds, I actually bought the fretboard in. It was a lot easier for me. I didn't want to do that while I was learning how to do the neck through design. So if you remember back, I've done a neck through bass and a neck through 6-string electric. So this time I want to start by making my own fretboard. The second thing I've never done is I've never put a top on a guitar. So I've always used the natural wood colour and just lightly oiled it to finish my previous guitars. This time I want to put a coloured dye on a nice maple top. So they're the two things. I'm going to build my own fretboard and I'm also going to put a maple top on. And obviously everything else that goes into making a guitar. I do have some spare pieces of wood already. If you remember, my very first Telecaster I built was actually made out of an old piece of oak. I still have a piece of that, an old piece, and that's going to make the neck. Also, with regards to the fretboard, I've actually made a test one. So this was my first attempt just to make a test. This is a 25.5 inch scale length with 21 frets. But when I was looking through my old wood to see what I wanted to use, I actually found an offcut from one of my neck through guitars. Now, I don't know if it's going to work, but I'm going to use this as my fretboard for this new guitar. So I'm going to start with that. I'm going to cut it to size, cut it out. I'm going to put a radius on it and I'm going to cut the fret slots into it. As you can see, this is the same piece of oak as I'm going to use as another offcut, and this is my first attempt at a fretboard. So I've already put a radius on it. I measured out 25.5 inches, 21 frets, although I do have a 22 fret line on there, but the piece of wood wasn't quite long enough. But it's okay, it looks pretty good. As you can see here, this offcut from my neck through guitar, it looks pretty good. There's some things I want to do to try and fix it. Now obviously I first need to thin it, so I need to plane that down. But also there's a couple of gaps in the wood. Now if you remember, this is actually made up of maple, is the light wood, and then rosewood, and then I can't remember the middle one. I think it was, is it Wenge or Wengi, something like that? I don't know how to pronounce it. But I used strips of that and stuck it all together. Now there's actually some very slight gaps between the maple and the other wood. So what I've seen is there's a technique where you basically just create a load of sawdust with the desired wood, and I've got some offcuts of that colour wood, and then you just push the sawdust into the gap with a bit of glue. So I'm going to attempt to do that. I'll show you going through that to see if it works. It's the first time I've tried that, but hopefully I can get rid of a very small gap that I can see between the two pieces of wood. The actual neck itself, I don't know if you can see, but I've already drawn out the lines on this. So for measurements, it's 43 millimeters at the nut and 56 millimeters at the bridge. I think that's pretty standard Fender size. I've actually oversized it, so mine's actually 45 and 58 millimeters, but that's just so I've got enough room to sand it down and get everything to match perfectly. But the very first job, obviously, is to start planing this piece down, to put a radius on it, to measure everything out, cut the fret slots, and turn it into a fretboard. Like I say, it's going to be a 25.5 inch scale length and it's going to have 22 frets. So let's start that now and see how we get on. So the first thing I'm going to do is just draw the dimensions onto this piece. I'm just trying to work out which side I want for the top and the bottom, and I think this is going to be the bottom. This side actually looks better and it's easier for me to repair the gap that I was talking about earlier. So all I want to do is I want to draw, what I'll do, obviously with this piece of wood in the centre, it makes a really handy centre line, because obviously the centre line when you're building a guitar is the most important line as far as I'm concerned. But using this means I've got a very, very convenient centre line already on there, which I've already checked, and it should be straight, and obviously it is very, very straight. So using that centre line, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to draw on here. I'm going to do 22.5 millimetres either side of the centre line, so a total of 45 mil, which leaves me enough to play with. I'm also going to leave enough at the end, just so there's enough room to put the nut and there's enough room to trim any excess and make it all straight and level, so it matches against the headstock correctly. This end is going to be 56 mil, but I'll make it 58 just so I've got enough room to sand down to the correct dimensions. So there's the start. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to just draw the nut piece on. I'll put my dots there. And then I'm going to get a fret calculator and start to mark the frets on there. And I'll just draw lines down there. I've drawn the lines on, so now I'm just going to cut the excess off with the bandsaw, and then I'll finish the edge on the sander. So I'll get as close as I can just with this, just to remove the excess. Now I'm just going to sand down and get as close to the line as I can, and that should be the major cutting of this fretboard completed. So after inspecting both sides, I have definitely decided that this is going to be the bottom, so this is the part that's going to stick to the neck. What I'm going to do is, it's a little thick at the moment, so I'm just going to do a few passes with the electric planer just to bring it down to around 8 to 9 millimetres, about 1/4 of an inch, something like that, before radiusing, just so it's the correct thickness. So let's get that job done now. Just going to finish tidying it with the manual planer. I've already sharpened the blade and set it really low just to take a very, very thin layer off. So that looks good, it's nice and flat. I've marked that this is the bottom, just so I don't get mixed up. So I've been reading online on whether to radius first and then do the fret slots, or to do the fret slots first. And it seems, by opinion, if you do the fret slots first, it's actually easier. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw out all the frets, and I'm going to slot them, and then I'm going to radius the top, and then I'm just going to finish the fret slots. So I'm going to try doing the fret slots first. So let's crack on with that. Now luckily for me, obviously, I've already made the template. But to make this template, I actually just went onto a fret calculator, put in 25.5, and it tells you the distance of each fret from the nut. You should always measure the distance of each fret from the nut. Don't measure between the frets, because any slight issues means the rest of the frets are out. I'm actually just going to go on the fret calculator and do manual measurements just to make sure this was correct before I do any cutting. So let's just crack on and do that now. So immediately what I've found is, as I started to try and put the saw the frets into the fretboard, I found it's a lot harder to keep my saw straight, and I don't have a proper jig to do this. When I did my practice fretboard, I actually radiused it first, and what I found was because the wood is slightly curved, it was much easier to start a really straight line on the peak of the radius, and then the rest of the fret went in, the rest of the saw went in very easy, and it kept a perfectly straight line. So before I saw too deep into this, I haven't done, I've just done some markers. I'm actually going to radius this first, and then I'm going to saw the frets into it. And I think it's just going to be a much easier job based upon my first attempt. So let's get started, and I'll show you my radius technique. So if you remember from one of my other videos, I looked online and I posted a link. I found a guy who showed a really good technique for radiusing fretboards with tools such as these. So the secret is and I've cut this 10-inch radius. I had this 10-inch radius spare, so it's going to be a 10-inch radius on the fretboard. But what you do is you get your radius, you put it underneath the sander, clamp it down, and now of course when you push the fretboard against that, it will automatically sand to the radius you need. It's a great technique. It seems to work first time I tried it. So let me just get this set up, and then we'll start radiusing the fretboard first. So finally, I've completed the fretboard. So it's got a radius on it. I've put sawn the fret slots into it. Everything's measured correctly. It's looking really good, so I'm really pleased with that. Everything's straight and level. So that'll be the end of this video. For the next video, I'm going to start working on the neck, and I'll glue the fretboard to the neck, and we'll finish the neck off. So see you next time.